Hey, everybody on the stream, welcome to the show. We're going to kick it off now. Hello and welcome to Python Bytes, where we deliver Python news and headlines directly to your earbuds. This is episode 281, recorded April 27th, 2022. I'm Brian Hawken.
I'm Michael Kennedy.
And I'm Anna Story.
Welcome, Anna. Before
Thank
we
you.
jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a data engineer, or at least at the moment. I'm by training, I'm a linguist. So I hold degrees in both theoretical linguistics and computational linguistics. So I'm really about how the information is encoded in our brains and how we share this information. And that's why I work in the tech.
Nice.
So yeah, since I got my master's in computational linguistics, I worked at Amazon, at the Alexa AI org for a while. So first worked as a language engineer, actually. So I was more on the side of linguistic side of things, and so dealing with extracting the semantics and the meaning really out of the data for Alexa. Then gradually I switched over to just data processing, and been in the role of data engineer for about 3-4 years now. And I'm currently with Github, which is a worldwide sports retailer. So working with lots of data there.
Okay. Wow,
That is
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's been a ride.
Yeah, it's really neat how we can speak to our devices these days, and they kind of actually work, do amazing things, right? Like, I know when Alexa
Yeah.
first came out, and Siri especially, it was like, I don't really want to. That thing is so not getting. And now I talk to my devices all the time. It's amazing.
There are some things that are really sophisticated that they can do now. Sometimes I can't even believe like where we're actually getting there. So it's pretty exciting. And sometimes I admit that, stubborn things that sometimes they're like, really? You can't do it?
Yeah.
But I realized that, having worked on that, actually, I realized that sometimes it's just kinds of things that, like from a professional standpoint, it might seem like kind of trivial to me, but I realized that, there's so much work put into these things, and then the AI of the actual device, that sometimes just like you don't get, to all these little like corners, right? So one of the things that I got to work at some point was actually helping Alexa kind of know when she needs to stop. When she needs to stop talking about things and telling you about things, like whatever she found on Wikipedia or whatnot. So, it's funny.
Fantastic.
That is funny. So, well, for our first item, Michael, do you want to kick it off?
I will definitely kick it off. Let's take it to the next level with this one. So this is an article by Iluda called Take Your GitHub Repository to the Next Level. And there's kind of 13 levels, but I guess it's a spectrum. You decide which level you want to take it to. So here are basically 13 ideas on how your GitHub repository can be better. So there was a topic I was going to cover. After I explored more, I decided, not so much. But as part of it, there was a conversation about some WebAssembly stuff in Python, and I checked it out. It's really cool. They're like, we're going to use this library. This is the fundamental thing that makes it work. And I go to the GitHub repo for that, and it says, here's how you build it. And that's it. I'm like, wait, okay, great. But why do I want it? What can I do with it? How do I use it? I don't care about how do I build it. Like, that's the last, I'll just download the WASM file. But what do I do with it once I get it, right? There was just none of that. And so that's kind of, this article helps you think through those ideas.
Oh, nice.
So number one, and it's Python friendly because it starts with 0, step 0, rather than 1, make your project more discoverable. Now, every one of these comes with a recommendation, a bit of a description, and then examples, which is cool. Nice. So, for example, this one says what you can do is to help people find your project. If the name of your project does not carefully describe what it is, you can put tags, basically. So like refactoring or science or things like that might be something you put on there that's not immediately obvious from it, right? So you can tag subject areas and whatnot, and they have some examples. So for example, there's this thing called Well app, which is like a mindfulness app for the Mac. Of course, it's for the Mac, isn't it? So it has tags such as macOS, productivity, happiness, mental health, but also Flutter and web app if people wanted to check out a Flutter web app, right? Okay, so that's, there's other examples as well. That's step 0. Step 1 is choose a name that sticks. Something that's available on PyPI, something that people can Google, something that people want to say. It doesn't sound silly or unprofessional if they were to use it. Like, you wouldn't call your web app Fancy Pants Server, right? You wouldn't say, well, our Fancy Pants Server is really scaling today. Like, you wouldn't want to speak that way necessarily, so don't name it that way, right?
Yeah.
So choose a name that sticks.
And that we can say on air. So
Yes, exactly. And is somewhat predictable in the pronunciation, maybe, because that's also a challenge. But so there's some examples of like, yeah. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about the name, something that I ran into today, particularly with Python, some of the services or applications and libraries as well that often end in py, and sometimes you don't know if it's pi or p in that case. It's like confusing, and then you're talking to somebody else who's talking about the same thing. They're like constantly confused. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It matters a lot. Let's see. So some of the things are conduct a thorough internet search for the name, avoid hard to spell names, get the dev or .io domain if you really, really care about it. Is it some random small little package, or are you trying to create the next fast API, right? A name that conveys some meaning. I was thinking about Jupyter, for example. Like, Jupyter is pretty interesting because it's kind of hard to spell, but once you know it, you just know it, and it very clearly works well in a search. There's probably no domain name that's like a misspelled planet type of thing. It was probably a really good choice, even though it kind of breaks the maybe hard to spell at first.
yeah, but it's easier to search, right?
Yeah. So the example they give for this one is size limit is the name. And what does it do? It calculates the real cost to run your JavaScript app or lib to keep good performance. It'll show an error in a PR if the cost, basically file size, exceeds the limit. That's cool. The next one, I'm all about this. Display a beautiful cover image. So if you go to a repo and it's just the text, that's not amazing. You want some color, and you don't necessarily have to have it like an amazing logo. So they come back to this well app, and it's just a W with like a little connection smile or something under it. One thing I did learn about this, though, that I thought was interesting, like, how do they center this image but not have it go all the way across the README? If you go to the README and you actually look at it, apparently GitHub will let you put full HTML inside of your README for the segments that need lots of formatting. I thought they wouldn't. I know some Markdown does fall back that way, but I didn't think GitHub did. Anyway, apparently, yes, you can.
Neat.
Also, this one's quick. Badges, like, is CI passing? What's the license? And so on. Is there a YouTube link to like a YouTube channel that shows people how to use it? Some more of those as examples. Write a convincing description in a paragraph or two. Add things like, what is this repo or project? How does it work? Who will use it? What is the goal? And so on, right? Real simple one. And again, they come back to the size limit. It's a performance tool that'll crash your CI if it gets too big. Here we go. Get into the ones that Brian and I love. Record visuals to attract users. Yes. So you might think there's no UI aspect, but here's a full-on CLI example that is create Go app CLI. And all it does, imagine this, it creates Go apps on the CLI. It's a good name that conveys what it does. But if you go to see, is like, how do I create one? It has the option, but then under it, it has an animated GIF doing the things that creates the app and showing you the tree structure that results, the file structure that results, and so on. Then a full video and a documentation to that thing, and so on. So that's pretty awesome. And how about you? Brian and I are always trying to quickly jump into a project and figure out what is it about. Is it polished and so on? But that's because we run this podcast. How do you see this sort of pictures and animations for repos?
Yeah, that's super helpful. I really like the idea with the animation. just basically taking you through what the kinds of things that this particular app, for instance, can do. That's super helpful if more and more people start doing it. I don't think it's super popular yet. I don't know about how about you guys, but I haven't seen it a whole lot, times.
Yeah.
But it definitely looks nice.
Yeah, I really like it as well. All right, let's see. Another one is create a practical usage guide, like how to use it with some examples and some templates. Answer common questions like an FAQ. Can I use it on Windows? Or does it require admin support? I don't know, something like that. Build a community. So maybe you have this is probably further down the line, but like, do you have a Discord community for your project? Or you can even just enable discussions on the GitHub repository. I'll end up with people opening issues on my various repositories saying, I have a question. Like, okay, a question's not an issue. An issue is a thing that is wrong or a thing to be improved, but they don't have another way to communicate traditionally. But GitHub now has, in addition to issues, they also have a discussion section that's more open-ended. So I think that's off by default, if I remember correctly. At least on the older ones it is. So I go and turn that on. Code of conduct, that's all good. Contributor guidelines, choose a license, the right license. Remember, if you don't choose a license at all, that means it's unlicensed and people can't really use it. So add a roadmap, create GitHub releases. One thing that's I didn't pull up that's pretty cool is release drafter. So I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this, but this is a pretty cool thing as well. Release drafter drafts your next release notes as PRs are merged into master or main, depending on how you set up your repo. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Customize your social media preview. So if somebody shares your project, you can control what is shown in that little Twitter card or other cards. Wow. So apparently that can be customized inside of your GitHub repository. And launch a website. Off it goes. You can use GitHub Pages, or Netlify is really easy and free for static sites and so on. So anyway, there's a bunch of things people can do to take their repo to the next level. What do y'all think?
I think it's great.
Yeah, I love this list. It looks very nice.
I don't do any of these things. And I probably should.
I might have a picture. I have a usage guide. Oh, there's also one that talks about how to install it that I somehow skipped, but most things don't need more than install.
One of the things that I see a lot is, I don't know if this covers it, but I see documentation that's on Read the Docs, which is great. But I still think a quick start or a little, like, this is how you install it and this is how you can do a little bit of something with it, that should be in the README, even if you have other documentation, because I don't want to have to just go to the documentation to see if this is the right project for me. So,
yeah.
This is great. So we have a question of how does one create a CLI animated GIF? And I don't know if if this article covers that, but
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll have to research that and get back to you.
Well, Alvaro, what I do is I'll use Camtasia, and you can record a Camtasia video of just the window, and then there's different output options like just audio or just the video or an animated GIF. So that's one of them. Cool. Jeremy Page points out there are a few tools to record that in Cinema. I don't know, like ASCII Cinema, basically. I don't know how to say that. It's often used pretty cool. And Dean,
speaking of difficult names,
exactly, I'm at a loss on that one. Claudia, who I just had on Talk Python, has a blog post about many of those things, and he has a cookie cutter for release drafter and badges. Yeah, I covered that on Talk Python just recently about hypermodern Python. So awesome. Well, that's probably way more than people want to know about their GitHub repository, but so often GitHub repositories these days serve as your CV or your resume when you go to apply for developer jobs. And if you end up at somewhere that looks like what they described here, rather than a bunch of things with like weird commit messages and nothing, like that's going to make a different impression. Or if you want people to adopt it and start using it.
Yeah. And if you don't, then don't put this stuff in.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Brian, let's go faster.
Well, let's go faster. Speaking of CLI, So this is a fun tool. We're talking about Fastero. I don't know. Fastero. I'm going to go with that. So this is it's like time it on the command line. So, but it's pretty neat. So this is by Arian Wasi, and we've covered something of his before. So
It was the type explainer thing.
oh,
I don't
right,
remember
yeah.
its exact name, but type explainer, where you put a typed thing in there and it would humanize what those meant.
So this is a simple little tool, but I'm loving it already. So this one of it does either it times stuff, but it also compares times. So like in this we're showing the website here, but and it I can't tell what they're timing. So let's just pull over in the documentation. It does have a bunch of examples. So if you ran Fastero with two code snippets, and in this example we're showing is just showing either a string or an f string, timing those. So that's pretty neat. And those two code snippets, if you run those, it'll run both of those a whole bunch of times and do some statistics. Like in this example, it's running it 20,000 and 50,000 times. No, 20 million and 50 million. Wow. And then it shows you a little progress bar and then who wins. But if you're not comparing two things, it'll just show one with the same graphics. But you can do more than two. I did like 3 or 4 just trying this out to time different things and compare them. And this often that's why I'm timing something. I'm comparing two things and I want to see which one's faster. So this is a really cool feature. You can either pass in code snippets or you can give it two Python file names, and it'll run both those things. It's got a whole bunch of really cool features actually, and one of the things I like is you can, if you've got some code snippet that you are it needs some setup, but that the setup part isn't the part you're timing, you can give it some setup code to do before it does the timed part. So that's pretty neat. Anyway, just a really nice looking command line interface timing tool.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So you can sort of isolate the things that you really want to time versus the sort of the setup things that you don't really care about.
Yeah, I haven't tried the setup part, but it's cool that it has it in there. There's
Yeah, that sounds very nice.
documentation is pretty thorough actually as well. Quite a bit of customization available.
That's cool. Yeah, I agree that is nice, that setup stuff, because so often if I want to profile like some web app or something, it's the thing I want to profile is dwarfed by just loading up the framework and scanning all the files. And you're like, all right, now I got to hunt down for that little fragment that actually represents what I'm really after. So pretty cool.
Yeah, maybe I'll try one of those.
Yeah, and you can pass in strings of Python or you can pass in files. And
yeah.
When I saw the strings bit, I'm like, all right, there's a good use case for semicolons in Python. Right? Import this thing.
You can use them. Yeah.
So. Exactly. It makes you feel better. Awesome. Well, that's a good one. All right. Anna, on to you. What's your first one here?
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, data, my line of business. And I was just thinking that something that could be really of interest is, especially for that part of our audience that works with maybe like kind of data science projects. In general, you're collecting data. You definitely, in most cases, you get some kind of noisy data that you need to clean up and filter out in some way. And particularly so, I imagine we have a pretty large international audience as well. And also, on the other hand, if you're working with data from maybe social media, which is like very popular right now, one of the questions that you have to solve there is identify the human language of the data that you're working with. And sometimes you want to filter out the pieces of data that are maybe, for example, are not in English if you're like going through social media posts or something.
All right, you get that little translate this to your language. little button at the end if for some reason the popular post is in Spanish or something, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and some of the platforms, their APIs rather, do provide this kind of filtering on their backend. I know Twitter does that, but also, as I know, sometimes it's not as reliable, really. I guess maybe it's, again, like I could imagine that maybe it's not really sort of the ultimate goal. That's why they're maybe not putting as much love and care into this question.
Yeah.
So that's something that I had to deal a few times also. And the couple of libraries that I've worked with are langid and langdetect. There are a few more out there, and they're these ones have been out there for a while actually, and langid has been hasn't been actually sort of worked on actively for a few years now, but it's still kind of one of those like benchmark libraries for this kind of questions, and both of those are super neat actually. So langid is really popular, and one of the things that I really liked about it is that it actually covers a lot of languages. I've actually had different pieces of information depending on the documentation that I was using either at PyPy or at the GitHub page. So at some point I saw it was covering 97, and I think there are GitHub pages saying 97.
97
languages.
is a lot of languages. I couldn't name
So,
97 languages.
I'm a linguist. I would have trouble naming 97 languages off the top of my head. I definitely don't speak 97 languages. And some of the nice things about it is that you can use it as sort of like a standalone, module, like a command line tool, for instance. But you can also use it as launched as a web service. So that's really neat about it. And some more like nitty-gritty things that were really helpful when I was trying it out for some of my projects was that when you try to identify the human language using langid, it actually outputs the weights, and the calculation is done which is very typical in like a log space. So you have like these funky numbers in the end, trivially speaking. But the good thing is that you actually can convert them to like more confidence scores that, especially data scientists are used to. And that actually comes in super handy because sometimes when you're trying to filter out the data, and you know that this kind of tools are like obviously not 100% reliable, you can also use this confidence scores to sort of maybe use it as that okay, I'm taking this answer and I'm relying on that, or okay, maybe I'll just like drop this this piece of data altogether because it looks like the language identifier is not super actually sure like what kind of language this is, if you're targeting a specific language. And
this is wild.
Yeah.
So you basically might say we're 80% sure it's English, but it might also be Spanish or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Like English could be easily confused with maybe German or sometimes French, just because there's like so much of the vocabulary circling around between those two languages. So the identifier is not 100% sure that this is language X. And the funny thing is that I'm not so sure about langid. Langid is also statistical actually. No, remembering, and the langdetect as well. And sort of the flip side of that is that it actually works very well. The bigger piece of data that you're fitting into it, the more confident it's going to be. Like, right, that's how statistics work.
Yeah.
That's how machine learning works, sort of generally speaking. And if you're working specifically with this kind of short tweets or like social media posts, if it's like a really short phrase, sentence, interspersed with like emojis and stuff, it's probably not going to be super confident. So the bigger piece of data, the more confident the better the performance of the language identifier will be. So something to keep in mind when you're working with this kind of data and you're trying to filter it by language,
Yeah,
for
that
instance.
makes sense. If you have one word or something, it's very
Yeah,
hard
go
to follow.
figure, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
So this
Let's
being one file, sorry, but this being one file is insane. Like it acts as a web server and does all sorts of stuff. It's crazy.
This is crazy.
Yeah, and it's I really like something that I really like about it. It's pretty lightweight, sort of well isolated, low dependency kind of package, which is fascinating. Based on a kind of not a super sophisticated naive Bayes algorithm, if I'm remembering it actually correctly. So yeah, that's really fun. And it's really nice that it works so nicely. And the other one that I wanted to sort of kind of juxtapose to it was langdetect, which is in my second tabs there, which I happened to find a little bit more robust when I got to work with like the human language data in my projects. And it's also it's really neat and easy to use. And the great thing about the basic usage is very straightforward. It's like one of those packages you discover, like you know immediately what it's doing, how it's doing it, and like you really can understand in 5 minutes, is it going to be something that that's going to suit well in my project for my purpose.
Sure.
So the main methods are detect and detect lang. So you can either just call it in a piece of data and try and get the most probable language that this package thinks it is. Or you can have returned a list of possible languages. So it's going actually to sort them, to order them. So it could be like maybe English, and then there's a tiny fraction of probability that it's going to be maybe German or something like that, and then you can decide for yourself. So overall, from my experience, langdetect worked and identified languages a little bit better than langid, but that's sort of empirical data.
Yeah, that's great. It seems super
end.
useful for anyone that needs to parse text and can't be sure it's all in one language.
Yeah, so if anyone out there like working on some kind of data science project, working with human language data, I would highly recommend. And probably one of the things why langdetect is a little bit more confident and robust. I know that it covers fewer languages, so it's I think it's 55 languages total compared to what was it 97 for langid you said. Yeah,
Interesting.
but both are great.
Nice. Well, Michael,
Let me tell you about our sponsor for this episode before we move on. It's a podcast. Amazing. So this episode of Python Bytes is sponsored by the Compiler Podcast from RedHat. So everyone out there, just like you, Brian, and I, we're both fans of podcasts, listen to podcasts all the time and stuff. That's why we started some. We like them. And so I'm happy to share a new one from a highly respected open source company, Compiler, an original podcast from RedHat. With more and more of us working from home or being more disconnected, it's important to keep our human connection with technology. Compiler unravels industry topics, trends, and things you've always wanted to know about tech through interviews with the people who know best. So on Compiler, you'll hear a chorus of perspectives from diverse communities behind the code. These conversations include questions like, what is technical debt? What are tech hiring managers actually looking for? Hint, see item 1 to some degree. And do you know how to code to get started with open? How do you know how to code to get started with open source? All right. I was a guest on RedHat's previous podcast called Command Line Heroes, and that was a super produced and polished podcast. It was a really cool experience. And so Compiler follows along in that excellent tradition and that polished style. So I checked out episode 12, how we should handle failure, which I found really interesting. I really valued their conversation about making space for developers to fail. so they can learn without fear of making mistakes, like taking down the production website and so on, right? People grow through experimentation, but they also fail if they try new things. So you got to make sure that they get a chance to grow. So learn about the compiler podcast at pythonbytes.fm/compiler. The link is at your podcast player show notes right at the top. You listen to it on all the places that you would think. So thanks to Compiler Podcast for keeping this podcast going strong. And Brian, also just real quickly want to point out, I know people can just go to their podcast app, whether that's Pocket Cast or Overcast or whatever, and type in compiler and search. But please visit pythonbytes.fm/compiler, and there's a place to subscribe with all of your various podcast destinations. That way they know it came from us rather than just out of the ether. So if you're going to subscribe or check them out, please do through that link, just so people know.
Nice.
Yeah. So how about we talk about watching some things like files?
Yeah. We were listening. Now we're watching.
We were listening. Now we're going to watch. But watch them for changes, not watch what they are. So this one comes to us from Samuel Colvin of Pydantic fame. So, it's a pretty cool experience behind developing this API. And the idea is it's a simple, modern, and high-performance way to watch files for changes. So there's a lot of reasons you might want to do that. You might want to say, if somebody drops a file into this directory, I'm going to kick off a job to load it up and process it in some kind of batch processing. Or I want to have my web framework automatically restart if any of the files in here get changed, right? Any of the Python files or whatever. So you could use it for things like that. But the modern part's pretty interesting. It hooks into the underlying file system, the underlying OS notification systems, and is done through the Notify Rust library. So basically, it's a low latency, high performance, native, non-polling way of watching the files. It just goes to the operating system and says, hey, in this directory tree, if anything changes, call the callback. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So there's real simple uses here. Like I can say from Watchfiles import watch, and then just for changes in watch, some path, then you can process those changes. So here's an example of an app that just starts, and its job is to, as things change here, take them up. That might be an example of what I said about kicking off something over to load it and parse it and decide what to do, and then maybe pass it to Celery for background work, right? On the other hand, you might want to do other things while you're watching for changes as well in your app, in which case there's also an awatch, an asynchronous watch. So if you're doing other work and it's all async IO based, here you can just say, kick off the watching bit and await for the changes to happen, and then do other async processing like Fast API or web or database calls, web with HTTPX or database calls with Beanie or whatever other async IO things, and it sort of lets you run them in parallel, which is cool, right?
Yeah.
And then if you want to go even further, you can kick off a separate process and say, start a process that will watch for changes here and then call back this function if those things change. So that's pretty cool too. So there's all these different ways in which you can use it. But yeah, it's pretty neat. It's based on this Rust library, and it seems pretty powerful. There's also a CLI, which I did want to point out one other thing over here. Like this, I thought this might impress you, Brian.
Definitely.
I can do a command line Watchfiles command that will say, watch this directory, and if anything changes, rerun the failing tests.
That's very cool.
That's cool, right? So you just do Watchfiles and you run the string pytest --lf, which is pytest rerun the failing tests if anything changes. I think that's neat.
The command line stuff is actually cool. I'd check it out just for the command line usage, but the ability to use it programmatically too with an API, that's impressive, and I'm very happy they included that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, if you're going to use it through the CLI, this is the perfect pipx install type thing, right? Pipx install Watchfiles, and then it's not really tied to any of your projects. It's just always there. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, that looks super neat. Just made me immediately think about file triggers that are one of the things that is probably mostly used, or at least widely used in S3 and GCP cloud storage as well.
Yeah.
And it's like Yep. I can imagine like all the possible ways that it can be used. Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah,
I wonder if they, in their documentation, they actually provide any popular use cases or anything. They might not do that, but I was curious if they actually do.
Yeah, I didn't see any in particular. Just a couple
That'd
examples
be
on how you
fun
might
to
use
look
it and
at.
all. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's an older project called Watch God. I don't know anything about that one, but I'm glad I didn't learn about it because now there's a new one called Watchfiles. But if you're using the old one, this is the successor to that as well.
It's a funny name, but I could see why some people might not want to use it. So,
Yeah, well, I can see item one, right?
Yeah.
Pick a name that people will be willing to talk about. Exactly.
yeah. Well, I want to talk about a new tool as well, coverage. Not hopefully all of us are familiar with coverage.py. So it's maintained by Ned Batchelder, a really cool tool. But there's a new guy on the scene, and the new person on the scene is Slipcover. So Slipcover, and actually I heard about Slipcover through the coverage.py Twitter account, which was interesting. So not surprising though, Ned's a pretty open-minded guy. But so Slipcover is coverage, but it's pretty new. So some of these commits that's just within the last week or so that this came in. So there's it's still at like, I think the version is 0.1.1 or something like that. We even just got a new one out this morning. So why would you want to use something different? Well, the big selling point of this is it's really fast. It uses a different process for getting the coverage information, and it supposedly is only a 3% overhead, which depending on your code, coverage.py can sometimes slow down your code significantly. And if you've got a really long running test suite, making it even 20% faster, but sometimes coverage can make it like twice as slow. So if you've got a 5-minute test suite, that makes it 10 minutes, and that's a little painful. So this might be worth checking out. It's quite a bit faster. I tried it against Flask as an example, and the Flask numbers. So Flask has got a pretty tight test suite anyway. But so just straight PyTest on my machine, it was like 2.7 seconds. With coverage was about 4.3 seconds. And then with Slipcover, it was just a little slower than just PyTest. So PyTest 2.7 with Slipcover is 2.88. So just a little tiny bit more, and you get coverage information.
That's
Really
cool.
interesting.
Yeah. It is in the early stages though. There's some kinks to work out still. So I would try it out and watch this space. I think they're doing some really cool things. Definitely worth watching. But like for instance, I ran into issues on projects that use PyTest plugins. I don't know why, but the plugins don't get loaded. So the like for instance, I tried to run this Flask example, but with xdist, so that I could run all the tests in parallel to see if it sped up parallel runs. It also, it didn't recognize the parallelism, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But I am in communication with Juan, one of the maintainers of this, or let him know what I found out. I'm not just griping and not trying to make it better. I'd love to have this be a really cool tool. So
it looks neat.
That's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, and so the near zero overhead, that's mostly due to like how they managed to provide that. Did they talk about that in the documentation? It's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, with such low overhead, I'm tempted to think of a more diabolical use of it. Like I'm handed some crummy old app that doesn't really have tests, and I got to figure out, well, what part of this is dead? Because I don't know if you've ever picked up some old app that's evolved, and there's just stuff people don't take out because they're afraid to.
Yeah.
Just run this in production for a while. Once.
Oh yeah.
And just go, okay, these things don't look like they're doing it. There might be some case I need to track down, but this gray area over here that's not touched, let me look for things to delete over here. That'd be kind of fun.
That's my favorite use of coverage, is looking for dead code.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
before we move off this, Brian, Alvaro asked, does it have a PyTest plugin? I know you said it doesn't work run plugins, but this is the reverse question.
I don't think so. So you're running Slipcover and PyTest at the same time. I don't think you really need a PyTest plugin for it. It does work with PyTest, so you can run PyTest operations on with it. But
Nice, just not the bells and whistles yet.
right, but I'm sure they'll get there.
Yep.
Yeah. Neat. I would love to sort of circle back to the data at the, I'm afraid to sound like a broken record, but that's my favorite topic.
No, it's great to have you
and
on
actually-
to talk about it, because Brian and I don't live in the data science world, right? So it's
so
really
that's great.
cool. Yeah.
Well, you're welcome in our world. There's a lot of fun stuff happening here, and well, actually, if you think about it from the very beginning, right? Even before trying to wrangle the data and trying to infer any interesting information out of the data, you have to get it somehow. And sometimes, if you're like particularly working on some side projects on your own, you want to maybe try out a new tool, or maybe if you're doing like a machine learning projects on modeling approach, you usually need some very specific data to work on. And how do you get this data? Well, you have to actually go and maybe find some examples of the data on your own. And so something I wanted to talk about today was actually web crawling and web scraping, and a couple of tools for that. So one that is quite popular, and it's actually like an industrial grade kind of tool, is actually either scrapy or scrapy. I've heard both variants.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty great tool. So one of the great things, like from the get-go about it, is that it actually has built-in shell, so you can just go ahead and sort of try out things in the CLI, get the response from a URL, for instance, and then try to poke around it and then test out its behavior, which is really nice, and then see what the kind of things you might want from there. And if you actually sort of go ahead and use it for your module to get some data, rather, it provides all sorts of really nice functionalities. To begin with, for instance, the choice between using either CSS selectors for the content of the web pages, or XPath, which is obviously like a little bit more flexible and powerful, where you can travel.
It's more fragile though, because if they make any change to the page.
That also, yeah. But still, yeah. Well, it's a part of the game.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then some other really nice things about it is that actually they do a lot of like heavy lifting for you in terms of, for instance, templating. So you can, there's built-in method for start project, and you can run that, and right away you have the whole structure and like all sorts of the boilerplate kind of code, and you just fill in the certain pieces, for instance, for item processing, which is in their pipelines modules, I think, some of the settings, etc. And there you go. You have like a huge amount of work already sort of preset for you, pre-done kind of for you. And then some other nice things about it is that they also provide you with like numerous choices actually for exporting the data and for storing the data as well in a few places, and the formats that you would love to use for it. Sort of like all those typical standard things like CSV, JSON, etc. To
Sure.
some more, some less frequent options, really.
Yeah, another thing that's pretty interesting about this whole project is that there's a web scraping as a service company.
Yeah.
Behind it, right? It used to be called Scraping Hub. Now it's Zyte, Z-Y-T-E. And
Zyte,
you can basically go in there and just sign up and hand it one of these spiders, and it'll just run it on the different servers, try to avoid getting blocked, all that crazy stuff.
Exactly, yeah. Therefore, it's so elaborate, and they really put a lot of, just like I was talking before, a lot of love and care to like all of the sorts of functionality, like covering all those corners of like what you might want from like a web crawling tool. And some other examples that I found particularly useful, for instance, is the link extractor class. It's like really getting to like nitty-gritty, parts of the tool where you can extract further links from a page, but only those ones that to adhere to a particular pattern, for instance. And the list that you get is already deduped. So once again, it like alleviates so much of the dirty work on your part. So that's really great. And they do provide actually ways to interact with the pages as well. There's a form request class that you can use, and it does provide some functionality where you can interact with the page, but I haven't used it as much myself, so I'm not like entirely sure like how fascinating it is.
Yeah.
But it is probably well done as well. And another library that I wanted to touch on briefly today as well was robox. That's actually something new for myself. That's something I'm in the process of exploring. So I haven't had a chance to like work a whole lot with it yet. But it seems really, really interesting, and I would be happy if I got to hear from somebody else who has tried it out or something. Because it, well, in the first place, it's built on top of HTTPX and Beautiful Soup 4 rather. They're super popular in the industry in sort of the data processing line of work, and particularly web crawling and web scraping. But it adds some really useful functionalities, and it looks like it allows even more of this interaction with the pages in a like very neat and clean way. You can probably find examples away here. Yeah, in the documentation. It looks so nice and clean and straightforward. Looks lovely. So yeah, I'm really excited about this package, and hoping to have an opportunity to test it out soon.
Yeah, Robox looks very interesting. It looks very Selenium-like, where you could actually control the page as well. Like fill in the comments with this, fill in the first name with that, and then submit. The other thing that's cool about it is it has async support for doing all those things.
Exactly.
You can scale it as well.
It does.
Oh, that's fantastic. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Nice. Well, where are we at now? We have
extras. Extra. Hear all about it. I only got one. How many you got?
I got 0.
0. All right. Anything you want to give a quick shout out to while we're here?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I wanted to tell you all about my terminal adventures, I suppose we'll call them. So I've been using ohmyzsh, which is amazing. I love ohmyzsh. But I also started playing with ohmyposh and please and some of these other things. And I thought, oh, well, how am I going to decide between, say, ohmyposh and ohmyzsh? Well, it turns out, Brian, you don't have to decide. You get both. So here's a little animated video I'll throw up for people who are watching, and I'll put it in the links as well. So you can see this cool prompt, which is all driven by ohmyposh, but you can see like autocomplete into local Git branches through ohmyzsh for either branch or check out. Wow. And then on top of that, we can do like PLS, which is amazing. You can do, and mcfly. We talked about mcfly before, which gives you autocomplete into your history and sort of a Emacs style editor type of AI complete. And then PLS for a LS replacement that is developer friendly with like little icons for the file types, and it uses git ignore to hide stuff that you don't want to see, and it's like Python friendly, like understands V and Vs and de-emphasizes them and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, people have been trying to decide between these things. It turns out they all go well together. You don't have to decide.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Pretty
really
neat.
like ohmyzsh, and that looks even
Yeah, and all
cooler.
the stuff that works, you don't have to give up any of it. The only thing that isn't there is the prompt, and the prompt is not all that great, honestly. I mean, I know you can customize it, but I think it's better in ohmyposh, which is pretty amazing. So, people who are listening, they can check out the little video I'll link to somehow. I'll find a way to do that in the show notes, so you all can check it out.
Okay.
That's my extra.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
But I
about a
guess,
joke?
how about a joke? So we're all starting to go back out to dinner, restaurants. COVID's over, I hear. Not necessarily, but here's one from a slightly different perspective. It says, "Hello, I'm your server today." Brian, can you just describe for people listening what's in this picture?
There's two robots at a restaurant sitting down, and there's a server rack next to them.
Yeah, okay. And the subtitle is, "When you go out for a bite," BYT. It says, the server is by the table where the robots are drinking. It says, "My name is DHX005972, and I will be your server this evening."
I love this one.
Thanks.
Good.
All right, that's what I got for us for our joke today.
Nice. Well, thanks, Anna, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for having me.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Brian, as always, and everyone out there listening. Thanks so much.